So I follow a number of preachers, teachers, and theologians on a weekly basis. A few of my favorites hail from Luther Seminary, located in Minneapolis, the place where 2 weeks ago George Floyd was murdered by police. Matt Skinner is a professor of New Testament theology at Luther. "Dear working preachers," he wrote, "the people of the world and your local community are suffocating under the weight of COVID-19, white supremacy's carnage, ballooning unemployment, yawning injustices, and mendacious politics. In such a climate, your pastoral instincts will urge you to keep Trinity Sunday free from transcendental musings and arcane discussions about doctrine. You have to preach into the moment." Another preaching professor, James Howell, wrote this: "Pastorally, we have to bear that everyone is so edgy right now. We were before George Floyd. Now every little action like a powerful magnet attracts stray metal. On Sunday," he said, "I went to an exceedingly peaceful Christian gathering to express solidarity with our Black fellow Christians and got accused of fomenting violence against property. The church can't remain silent, but how to say anything and have a chance of being heard, especially when the people aren't in front of you so you can read their body language, grimaces, nods, or puzzlement. Preach into the moment," they say, but how in these highly charged times? With humility, I think, and grace. And so may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. May they be true and life-giving, challenging and prophetic. Amen. It's Trinity Sunday today. Like many others, I'm using the text from the very beginning of Genesis. But unlike others who are still following a lectionary, I've designed for us a special summer series focusing on how God has always been on the move and what that means for us today. While we continue to find our bearing in our new COVID-19 shaped reality, I hope we can discover again and maybe anew the truth of God's restless, energized moving. When we feel unsure of our own lives and circumstances, we can be sure of the God who is constant and faithful, the God who has promised to be with us wherever we go, even unto the end of the age. God's preferred mode of transportation has always been the human heart. So to Genesis 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the water. The very first time we meet God in the scriptures, the Spirit is moving, hovering, dancing, brooding over the formless void of the world. God is active. God is energy. "I am that I am," God says to Moses from within the burning bush. "I am" is a verb. Interestingly, much later in the first letter of John, God is described as love. Love is also a verb. It is active. It is energy. Love moves. Love hovers and dances and broods. Love is pregnant with life and potential. Now, before there was any mention of any days of creation in the beginning, the Hebrew says that the earth was Tohu Wabohu. The emphasis of Tohu Wabohu is not on form, but on function. The earth at that stage constituted an inhospitable, unsuitable environment for plant, animal, or human. It was non-organized, non-functional, that's tohu, and thus was also void or empty, bohu, of any living organisms. In the beginning, Earth was a vast, unlit matrix of water, soil, and mineral. There was nothing evil about its state. The earth was not deficient, but merely incomplete, not yet organized to be a hospitable environment for life. So an appropriate literal translation of Tohu Wabohu in Genesis 1:2 is this: Now the earth was unformed and empty. It was pre-functional, and the Ruach, the Spirit of God, hovered over the waters. Love brooded, the breath of life danced. Standing in his kitchen by the stove one day, a rabbi asked his student, "Why does a pot of water boil?" "Well," replied the student confidently, "it boils because of the rapid vibration of water molecules due to the application of heat. That's why water boils." "Correct," said the rabbi. "But why does a pot of water boil?" The student looked perplexed, and the old rabbi smiled, taking the pot off the stove, saying, "The pot of water boils because someone wants a cup of tea. That's why it boils." The first answer, you see, speaks of physical process. The second, of personal purpose. And this is where we often get tripped up in our discussions around creation. Too often people seek the answer to the first scenario, to a physical process. But Genesis 1 and the rest of the Bible, to be honest, tells us why the world was created in that second sense, the personal purpose. Why, when looking at a formless void, unformed and empty, why did God move? Why did God brood, hover, dance upon the earth? Why did God create? So here's your lesson on the Trinity for Trinity Sunday. Creation happened because the inner relationships of Father, Son, and Spirit, or love, lover, and love song, were so profound, so pregnant with divine love that an outburst and overflow made the universe happen. Its goodness mirrors the love in God's eternal triune heart. Is that a physical process? No. Is that a personal purpose? Absolutely. And that simple fact that God moved over the face of the deep and impregnated the world with life and love tells us more than we realize about who God is, God's relationship to us, and then the blueprint for our relationship to one another. Psalm 104, a soaring poem about God as creator, says this in verse 30. "When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground." The Spirit whom we encountered just last Sunday in the sweeping drama of Pentecost is that same life-giving breath that renews the face of the ground and brings life out of Tohu Wabohu, out of that which is incapable of supporting or sustaining life. Folks, we are living in a time which we might characterize as Tohu Wabohu. Now hold up, you might be thinking. You and I are here and alive, and there are animals and plants, so the earth is not unformed, it's clearly not empty and devoid of living creatures. Nevertheless, I would contend that the systems of our world are fundamentally incapable of supporting and sustaining life. Pick a news headline, any headline. You want to talk about COVID-19? About how viral pandemics affect human bodies or families or communities or countries? How healthcare systems are buckling under the pressure, how social services are reeling and having to be redefined on the fly in order to support individuals and communities? How lockdown orders vastly increase the problem of domestic violence and violence against women? How we know that when it comes to healthcare, there are major disparities that favor certain races and economic demographics over others, and so some groups of people are systemically contracting coronavirus at rates that others might never see? Tohu Wabohu. Maybe you'd like to talk about the environment. It's been a nice sunny day. We could talk about the environment and how we've essentially hit a point from which we can't return with the destruction of Earth's resources and ecosystems. Scientists have said the Earth is too hot to sustain life at this rate. And it's going to take far more than people recycling their pop cans to make any meaningful difference. And unlike the coronavirus, the environmental crisis did not sneak up on us 6 months ago. We've been getting severe warning signs for decades. Tohu Wabohu. Or maybe we should talk about racism, church. Maybe we should talk about how less than a week before Pentecost Sunday, that day when we celebrate the breath of God giving life to the Church of Christ in the world, less than a week before that, a black man's neck was crushed for an agonizing 9 minutes under a police officer's knee. The breath of God crushed out of a child of God because of the color of his skin. "I can't breathe," he said. "Mama," he cried. And not just George Floyd. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Regis Korchinski Paquette, and trust me, I could go on. Do not be fooled by the narrative that racism isn't a problem in Canada. We may have been the promised land at the end of the Underground Railroad, but we have also housed the KKK. Consider reading up on the cross burning here in Oakville in 1930. And not to overlook our Indigenous siblings, keep in mind that the last residential school was only just closed down 24 years ago. And we still have the unsolved cases of hundreds of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We have a problem with racism in Canada. Say it. Sit with it. Tohu Wabohu, that which is incapable of supporting or sustaining life. Everywhere you look now, things are crumbling under the pressure. Systems are cracking. Spin doctors are being drowned out by cries for revolution. People are rising up. Everything is breaking, wrote Reverend Cameron Trimble last week to preachers all over the world. White racism is breaking black lives, she said. National leaders are breaking our laws and institutions. Our closed economy is disproportionately breaking the poor. Our fear of each other is breaking our communities. Our denial of reality is breaking our hope for a better world. Everything is breaking. But as scary as it is, let it break. Let it break our bigotry. Let it break our hate. Let it break our fear, our privilege, our aggression, and our silence. Let it break capitalism, our failed national leaders, our systems that oppress. Let it all break. When we give up the hope of fixing our broken systems, we free ourselves to create and imagine new ones. Yes, everything is breaking. Let it break. A better world is possible when we let go of this one. We're in this together. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was tohu wabohu. It could not sustain life, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the breath, the Spirit of God, swept, moved, hovered, brooded, danced over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. The good news is this. The Spirit, the life-giving breath of God, is still moving, still active, still brooding, still hovering, still dancing. She is fire and she is wind. She blows over that which is formless, void, incapable of supporting or sustaining life, and she gives light, and she brings life out of tombs, breathes life into valleys of dry bones. Still today, God's creative purposes are being worked out through the animated, wild, rushing wind breath of God. My dear friend, you might have heard of him before, the Reverend Dr. Sam Parks, shout out, began his Pentecost sermon last week by asking, how do you breathe life into a system of death? Well, he said with his very delicious Southern accent, this is what God has been doing from the beginning, y'all. From the deathly system of chaos, God orders creation and creates a human being and breathes into them the breath of life. The good news is that this is still happening, even today. But it might not look like a utopian Renaissance painting where lion lies down with the lamb. Not yet. God moved over the face of the deep, and the first thing created was not the garden. It wasn't plants or animals, not even you or I. It was not a system or a structure of law and order. It was light, just light, the first good thing. In his letter to the church in Ephesus, the Apostle Paul wrote about Tohu Wabohu. He said, friends, we aren't fighting against human enemies, but against rulers, authorities, forces of cosmic darkness, and spiritual powers of evil. Therefore, pick up the full armor of God so that you can stand your ground on the evil day, and after you have done everything possible, to still stand. God moved over Tohu Wabohu and breathed the command, let there be light. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and life was the light of all people, all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Everything is breaking. As scary as it is, let it break. Let it all break. A better world is possible when we let go of this one. This one was not working. And let's trust completely in the one who is the light of the world, the bread of life. Friends, as we break the bread, may our own hearts be broken by the pain of the world, the Tohu Wabohu all around us, and our participation in it. As we take the bread into our bodies, may we be nourished for the challenges that lie ahead. As we recognize our brokenness, confess our complicity in personal and systemic sin, repent, and be renewed. May the bread and cup that connects us to one another and to the one who brought life out of the grave, life out of Tohu Wabohu, give us the strength we need to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. To God be all the glory. Amen.